In the UK, I mean, lots of our listeners are from the US and all around the world.
Yep.
But in the UK just now, people are using this phrase, a quiet revival. And this comes from a study a couple of months ago by the Bible Society in England and Wales, who discovered that the number of young people attending church and showing an interest in spiritual things had really exploded in the last few years. And also maybe young men especially. And it's interesting as well that folk tend to go to either conservative evangelical churches or bizarrely Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox churches. That's also attractive. That's another story. But are you seeing evidence of the quiet revival? By the way, I think the word revival is a bit overused, but that's another story. Are you seeing some evidence in your circles?
Yeah, it's interesting that, isn't it? Our kind of gut response to that word, I think, often as Scots and maybe in the theological water we swim in, we're kind of so anti-hype or anti, the bigged up sort of full of yourself. Look what's happening. Like we never want to do that, and so I think we can react against it. And something I've loved seeing.
In Scotland, we thought Pentecost was quite a good night at church.
Yeah, and I think there's I think there's something in that word that makes us react interestingly, but the reality of a broader spiritual openness, I think we are seeing in the younger generations at the moment, and particularly in the students we work with. Something that's helpful to note, I think, is that it's not just that they're really open to Jesus, it's that they're open to basically anything and everything. The kind of, sure, why not? I'll try this. That's true for all sorts of spirituality. And I think you're right, we are seeing often young men drift towards more traditional forms of that, whether it is the Orthodox Church or the Catholic Church. What I think happening is there's a bit of a divide in that younger women, student women, are often going towards more Eastern spirituality. Okay, so the stereotype of manifesting or meditation, that kind of thing. And in both cases, it can be a bit kind of pick and mix. They've not wholesale bought into an entire worldview that's based around Hinduism, but they're, we'll try that. Why not? We'll add a bit of that in. And so, that individualistic culture that we live in that you spoke about earlier has filtered down into people's approach to spirituality. So they take a bit of different things. That said, I think obviously that increased openness is a real opportunity for Christians. And so we are seeing almost that first conversation, have you thought about Jesus? Or, have you ever read the Bible? That's quite an easy conversation often, or more so than it was 5-10 years ago, because people haven't and don't see any really good reason why not. So that first conversation and the kind of initial interest, I think there is a lot more of that. People are a lot more open. In terms of the word quiet, in that sense, I think that is quite accurate. I heard a story from one of my staff a few weeks ago. So basically they in like January, I think it was, sat down beside a second year student at CE and said to them, I don't think I've ever asked you this, how did you become a Christian? What's your story? And they said, through the CE last year. Mm-hmm. And they'd arrived as a fresher, weren't a Christian, but were fascinated, were really interested, and so had started coming, had been part of a small group at the CE, had started going to church with some of the friends they met at CE, and at some point before Christmas had trusted in Jesus. But there was just no fanfare because they were already in those places and doing those things. So they, I guess it wasn't a big, huge, obvious, look at this, in lights. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that quiet thing, and the fact that the staff worker was like, someone became a Christian last year here and we had no idea. I think there is that sense of, actually, particularly when community is so involved in people's journey towards believing, that if they're already in those places and in those relationships, it's not as big a change. They've belonged first. So that's part of it. I think we are also seeing the increased interest from young men. So as a team, we had a day after our missions week. So they are kind of weeks in the second term, so around February, where we do a lot of gospel proclamation on the campuses, lots of seekers engaging with the gospel for the first time, and quite a lot of chances for people to hear things and ask their questions over the course of the week. So it's often a time where people become Christians or start going to church for the first time, that sort of thing. And so we were praying for particular people all across the country. We kind of wrote down lots of different names of folks to pray for from all the different Cs, different shapes and sizes. And as we wrote down these names of either people that were really, really seeking and quite close, or baby Christians, or kind of somewhere in between, 2/3 of them were men, which I think would have been like, what's happening? Why is this happening? If that had been 3-4 years ago. So I think there is a bit of a swing. And even in places where, particularly if it's a female heavy uni, or there's lots of courses that tend to have more women on them, even in those places, a lot of the seekers were men coming and just really inquiring. So I think that is a swing, and has been really interesting to think through, how do we best serve these guys? How do we really help them to keep looking into not just a Jesus they've heard about on YouTube or a podcast or have questions about, but a Jesus that is calling them to belong to a church family and to that 3D community like we're speaking about. That's a huge change for some of them as they come to believe. So I think we are seeing the increase from young men.